But you mentioned, we've mentioned the Inverness Oran a few times. That's a weekly that came out of Inverness, but just tell us a little bit about the Oran. It's been around for decades, correct?
It's almost 40 years now.
Mm-hmm. You've been with it since inception?
No. I joined it about a year after it started.
Yeah.
It was the brainstorm of a group of people in Inverness. Father Bob Neville was the curate in Inverness at the time, and he would get people together to talk about what could be done for the town, because the town was in desperate straits.
That's right.
And in one of the conversations that they were having, Rankin MacDonald, who's the editor of the paper,
right,
mentioned a newspaper as a communication tool. Father Neville and the other people bought into it.
right.
And it was a volunteer paper, and the parish turned over their Gestetner machine, and it began publishing just by hand, and for the town of Inverness.
Yeah.
I had come home in the meantime. My father was sick. I came home to take care of him, and in the meantime, I would make a contribution, like write an opinion piece or something to the Oran, but I wasn't directly involved in it because I didn't have the time. And but eventually, there was a grant, and some people who were about 20 people involved in the beginning, but some people had to go away. Some people found they just didn't really have the interest.
Right.
And what it came down to was, after I had started, I'd been there about a year, and there was Rankin MacDonald, Ellen MacDonald, and myself, and we had this paper, and we either just shut it down and go back to Calgary,
right,
where we had all come home from,
yeah,
or we tried to turn it into a business.
Yeah.
And as opposed to the volunteer,
Yeah.
you know. And so we opted to try to make it work.
Yeah.
And we've been extremely fortunate. The community has been so supportive.
Yep.
But I also felt like it always had access to the paper, because our early philosophy was that there was no story we wouldn't do.
Right.
It couldn't be too small not to have news value.
Yes. Yes.
And the other thing that Rankin and I discovered as reporters was that when somebody called you to come someplace and ask you to do something, it was a lot easier just to do it than to try to explain why you couldn't.
Why you couldn't? Yeah, that's funny.
So now the Oran it was in '76 that it was founded. It'll be 40 years in a couple of years' time. And
it employs
about 10
people. Yeah.
And
sells lots of ads.
Yes.
You know.
And one of the reasons when we began going to Community Newspaper Association annual meetings and trying to learn something there, and I remember one really experienced fellow explaining to us, he says, you know what, the only reason the Oran worked was because nobody among you knew what you were doing. He said, anybody with newspaper experience would come into Inverness County. You have no chain stores, you have no malls, you have no advertising base.
Right.
He said, and instead, you people didn't know that, so you did it with video store and bingo ads.
Yeah. No,
it has been a very
it's a real neat success story. Yeah, and it's a lovely paper, and it's not just read in Inverness County. I know there are all kinds of people in Sydney read it. They come up in their various outlets, and you buy it here, and you go in and say, I want to get the Oran, and they'll say, oh, it's sold out.
Yeah, and in the U.S. a significant number. And one funny little story about advertising in the Oran, the band Kilt during the 90s, they recorded a couple of CDs and they did a couple of national tours. and the Bonnie Jean MacDonald was the fiddler with the group, and I think she was maybe the manager or business manager. But anyway, about 3 or 4 weeks before the tour, they came in and they bought a quarter-page ad, you know, their tour, where they would be across Canada, you know, where they were playing. And because they couldn't afford to buy ads in every newspaper that they were going to. And Bonnie was telling me that, he said, you can't believe how successful that was. She's playing in a bar in Kelowna, and somebody read it in the Oran that you were coming, you know.